It was about 5 days before Christmas, 1971, when a stranger approached 10-year-old Christopher Carrier, claiming to be a friend of his dad's, and saying, I want to buy a gift for your dad and I need help. And because Christopher was eager to do something for his dad, he said, absolutely. So he jumped into the camper that was owned by a man who was not a friend of his father's. The driver took Chris to a remote field claiming to be lost and then asked Chris to look at a map. And while Chris looked at it, he was stabbed in the back with an ice pick repeatedly. And then this man took Christopher to a remote road in the Everglades. There, he shot him in the temple and left him for dead. And Christopher was in that spot for 6 days before he was found. Now, remarkably, he survived, Chris did. And not only did he survive, though he lost sight in his left eye, but he grew to live a full life. He's still alive today. Christopher, though, as you can imagine, was so remarkably traumatized by that attack that he lost peace. That's when you hurt someone, that's what you do. You rob their peace. And so he lived in anxiety, even when the police, they had found a suspect, but because he couldn't identify him, they had to let him go. Even under police custody, he just was a wreck for a while until things began to change. And they began to change because a friend invited him to a church hayride. And he goes to this church hayride, and then part of this event around the fireplace is somebody that actually has a relationship with Jesus Christ, talking about how God is real. We need him. We were made for him. He loves us, but we have a problem. And that problem isn't what's outside of us. It's actually darkness that's inside of every one of us. But he sent his son to die as my substitute on the cross to pay for those sins so I could be forgiven and reconciled and actually know God. He heard that, and he became a Christian that night. And when he did, his comment about it was, all my fears were replaced by an incredible peace with Jesus in my life. He even later said he came to, in a strange way, have a gratitude for the attack, not for the attack, but without it, he wouldn't have sensed his need for the Lord and wouldn't have become a Christian. He even came to a place of saying, Lord, I'm grateful if it took that. Eventually, Chris entered full-time ministry, and he has been in full-time ministry ever since, helping other people discover the joy that he had. Okay, so that was his past. Then, fast forward 25 years later, 1996, a detective calls Chris and says, we think we have a confession of the man who attacked you and tried to kill you. Turned out that it was indeed the man who they'd held as suspect, but because Chris couldn't identify him, they'd had to let him go. But now older, in a nursing home, about to die, he had confessed to detectives that he had done it. And the detective asked Chris, do you want to meet him? And Chris said yes. And so as he went, he was struck as he walked into the room of this man that he wasn't this large, strong person who had overcome him and tried to kill him. He was now a 77-year-old broken down man who was on the verge of death. Chris introduced himself. The man was actually blind, but he introduced himself, started to ask about the incident. The man initially denied it. And then Chris told him who he was, and went on to not only tell him who he was, but actually to tell him how God used it. And the man, Dave was his name. David came forward and said, it was me. And in that interaction, actually burst out a request for forgiveness. Would you forgive me? And what Chris went on to say is, what you meant for evil, I'm quoting, God has turned into a wonderful blessing. Your attack was used by God not only to heal my wounds, but to drive me to Jesus and to open doors to share the good news of Christ with many. And Chris offered forgiveness. Can you, in your mind, see the peace, not only that the Lord had brought to Christopher years before, but can you imagine the peace that meant for this man named David? That he had been forgiven. And that he'd heard the story. Chris goes home, tells his wife and the kids. They start going to meet with David day after day after day. Can you imagine what that was like for this man? And then in one of those meetings, Christopher, the pastor, asked David, well, have you become a follower of Jesus Christ, and would you want to? And David, from his bed, blind as he was, said, yes, I want to become a Christian. And so that day, actually, Chris led him in a prayer of confession, and David became his, can we go to the next slide? David became his brother in Jesus Christ. And just a couple days after that, David died. Can you imagine the impact on David's life? A few days later, what Christopher said was, this is not a story of regret, but it's a story of redemption. I saw the Lord give that man back his life and so much more. I can't wait to see him in heaven. That's what he said. Now, the reason I take the time to tell you that story is it makes visible our passage. A passage that promises that when we lack peace, he delivers it. A passage that promises not only does the Lord grant me peace, but the peace that he's given me, he actually wants to be a carrier to other people. And so not only is Chris a testimony of the peace that the Lord brings, but Chris is a testimony of how he can become a peacemaker, which is what it was that he was for David. And it is a story that shows the reality of the goodness of our God who is alive today. So that's our passage, Matthew 5, chapter 9, in which Jesus tells us, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Let's say that out loud together. Ready? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Today we're going to see not only that Jesus wants peace in your heart. So if you're lacking it, he reaches out with that today. But he actually wants to make you an agent of peace in other people's lives. And here's the shocker. When we do, not only do we look like the Lord, when we do, he actually becomes visible in this world. He is made visible by the peacemaking work of his people. Praise be to God for that. If there's anything more important, can you imagine anything more important that could be said of you in your life than this? That person helped me know and see God more nearly. If that sounds good to you, if the idea that God would use you to actually help people know him, then you've come to the right place, because we see one way that takes place today. If you're a guest with us today and new to Christianity, and maybe last week somebody showed up because they were just trying to get the inviter off their back, she said. So, or you're just searching and don't understand Christianity, but you're here saying, is God real? I want to tell you he is. And you get to see what it is he does in changing people's lives as we look today at Matthew. So we are in Matthew chapter 5, page 472 in your Bible. We've been working this summer or this spring through the Beatitudes, this picture Jesus gives in the beginning of his first sermon, in which he describes the transformation that his Spirit brings to the heart of all who are his followers. And all of the commands of Matthew 5 through 7 flow downstream from this change. So we're looking at the Beatitudes. We are memorizing them, we said. So we're going to quiz. Here we go. The very first Beatitude was, blessed are the poor in spirit. If you didn't know it, say it out loud with us. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who have started to get some sense of the reality and the majesty and the enormity and the riches and the greatness of God. You realize you have everything in this equation and I bring nothing. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of, those are kingdom of heaven, right? Sorry. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That was so strong. Someone said, God, that was great. Thank you so much. That's awesome. Why are we blessed? Because we have faith. We realize who he is. Second one, having looked at him, we look back at ourselves and realize he's holy and we're not. And so blessed are those who, we mourn over our sinfulness. We mourn over the darkness that's inside of us. And why are we blessed when we do that? Because we shall be comforted. Yeah, you're forgiven. Those are the people he forgives. And then looking back to him, remembering he has all power. Blessed are the people who look back at him and say, I want your power in my life. Not my power. I want to live in light of you. I want to walk. I want to be under the control of you. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Why do they inherit the earth? Because they're the ones through whom the power of God is at work. That's why. And then the last of the first four. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteous, just to be right with God. That's the only thing I want, is to be right with you, given who you are. For they shall be satisfied. Absolutely. Now, it's my contention that the second four, at least, first four are vertical, the second four now talk about how that changed life changes how we are with others. So Parker Settecase brought this message. The next one, blessed are, go to the next one. Blessed are the Blessed are the merciful. Look at somebody next to you and say, blessed are the merciful. Go ahead and do that. We're learning. Right? Blessed are those who get how much mercy they've received. So when someone harms them, it's easy to be merciful because I've been so forgiven by the Lord. And it demonstrates the fact that I'm his. So blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive. Absolutely. The next one. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are those who say, Lord, in every relationship, I want to bring nothing other than purity. I want to be innocent. And I want to convey innocence and purity. For they shall, and I don't fully even understand what that means. That's an unbelievable promise. Then we come to the one that we look at today, the seventh. And the seventh is, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. All right, well done. We're learning it. This is good. Okay, so let's get to peacemaking. What is the peace? 5 questions. The first is, what peace does Jesus have in mind? This is God himself in the flesh, in Jesus speaking these words to us. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are peacemakers. Well, what peace does Jesus have in mind? This is actually important because we use the word peace often to refer to the absence of hostility. So a peace movement, I remember in the 70s, early 70s with Vietnam, and everyone talked about peace. And it was all about ending the war in Vietnam. And when wars end, you enter into a peace process. So often when we speak about peace, that's what we're speaking about is the ending of hostility in relationships. And this means that, but it means what Jesus means by wanting peace for you is not just that you have no conflict. It's not that. It is also much more than what the Greeks thought it meant. The Greeks who epitomized peace as the highest of virtues actually thought that peace was an absence of emotion. So Epicurus said, peace comes from the absence of pain in mind and body. And the thought here is, if I can detach myself from anything in the world, it cannot do me harm. You know one group of people that live this way? The Jedi live this way. All right, I think there's this thing now about Star Wars analogies. Yeah, when the Jedi live in a peacefulness, the peacefulness they live in is trying to epitomize this. And the spirit of it is, if I'm not attached to anything, then nothing can harm me. All kinds of people try to live like that, which is how, in the flow of that approach to life, that's how Anakin became Darth Vader, because he dared to actually love Padme. And when he loved Padme and she died, what's the guy's name? The Emperor, that guy. That guy fed his anger and his rage and his wound and turned him into Darth Vader. And so the message of Jedi living philosophy is, so don't become attached to anything. I promise you, that is not what Jesus has in mind. He made you to love people. He made us to care. He's not called us to live a life in which, because we just keep ourselves from caring, we don't feel upset. He has something profoundly more in mind. When Jesus speaks the word peace, he is, of course, speaking the Old Testament word we all know, which is, anyone know what it is? It's shalom. It is shalom. And when we look at the word shalom, what we're talking about is a word that describes being whole, complete, and sound. When you wish for someone to have shalom, you're praying that they would be whole in all of the ways that they were created. Peace is the ultimate wellness that God created us to know. You know what the Hebrew word, one of the translations for the word friend is? Think of a friend. The Hebrew word for friend is literally the translation, man of my peace. It is the presence of one who brings something good to me. So when Jesus calls us to be peacemakers, he is talking about our receiving and giving wholeness. That's what he's talking about. Well, why is peace needed? Do you think peace is needed in our world? Yes or no? Gosh. If you were to describe the human race, peaceful is not one of the words you would use. We've been recording history since 3600 BC. In that entire time, there have only been 292 years, 5% of recorded history in which there hasn't been a war. 5%. During that same period, there have been 14,351 wars, large and small, 3.6 billion people killed in wars, 8,000 treaties broken, because nations are filled with people who lack peace. Right? Nations lack peace, individuals lack peace. I just ran across this study that said 25 to 40% of managers' time at work is spent in conflict management. Anybody have conflict at work? Nobody? Wow, that's okay. I guess you can't raise your hand because your boss may be in the room. That's right. Yeah, never mind. I'm good. All my staff is smiling, you'll notice. Yeah. That's great. Anybody have struggles with their neighbors? Does anyone lack peace in a relationship in their family? Yeah, I mean, our world is unsettled and peaceless. We're peaceless because we're not whole. That's what's so clear. And it's not only true outside, it's even true inside the church at times. Have you ever experienced a lack of peace in the church? Remember the one person that said the Christian army is the only one that kills its own wounded? Every single New Testament letter that was written by Paul addressed a lack of unity in the church. So this is a major area for us to be leaning into and seeing the Lord heal and bring about. Why do we lack peace? Obviously, we were born in the image of fallen Adam and Eve. We were born, Genesis chapter 5, 1 to 3 describes us being made in the likeness of Adam and Eve after they had sinned, after they'd rebelled against God, after darkness had entered their hearts, after they had been separated from him, after this infinite cavernous void opened in our soul where God was intended to be. We were made like that. And so when we read Isaiah describe this, he said, chapter 59, verse 1, behold, the Lord's arm is not shortened that he cannot save, or his ear dull that he cannot hear. The problem here, Israel, is not in God's inaccessibility, but verse 2, but your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God. And your sins have hidden his face from you so that he does not hear. That explains why in verse 9 he says, the way of peace we do not know. There is no lasting peace for any human being that isn't the fruit of being whole in a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. He is the bringer of peace. And what is the peace that he brings? A third question. The good news of the Bible is that this is exactly what it is that God has brought to us in his Son. Remember 600 years before Jesus when he was prophesied to come earlier in Isaiah, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and say it out loud, Prince of Peace, the ruler of peace over every realm of our lives. So the night that after Jesus' crucifixion, the people who had killed him were looking for the disciples, and they were locked behind a door back up in the inner room. But all of a sudden, pounding on the doors were these men who they'd been walking to Emmaus that night, and they came back and said, we saw Jesus, and he appeared to us. And we read in Luke chapter 24, as they were talking about these things, I think it's interesting, Jesus appeared when he was being testified about. There's something to reflect on there. As he said these things, Jesus stood among them and said, he didn't say, boo. I've always laughed, sorry. I joke about that every year on Good Friday. He would have killed them all if he'd done it. He said, peace to you. He had just risen from the dead, having removed the barrier that stood between them and the Lord, the Father, so they could be reconciled to him. When he said, peace to you, he meant it in a way that had never been experienced before. So what is the peace that the Lord gives us? Well, first of all, because Jesus Christ has died on the cross to remove the barrier of our sin, he gives us peace with God. Romans chapter 5, therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Do you have that? Do you know that? This is a peace that he brings. Each of these I could expand. I'm going to just keep moving. We also have peace in ourselves, right? Something changes inside. John chapter 14, Jesus in the upper room said, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give it to you. This isn't a peace because you've made a lot of money or gotten a job or won a game or any of that. It's a peace that has nothing to do with the world. It's a peace that comes from his love for you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let them be afraid. The night when Chris Carrier heard the good news of Jesus, that Jesus had died to reconcile him to God, he was overwhelmed with the peace of the Lord Jesus Christ. If you're not someone who has had the Spirit of God give you new birth, right? If you haven't become a Christian, it is almost impossible to explain to you what this peace is like. And if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, it is almost impossible to imagine life without it. It is something the Spirit of God does. He makes us whole. He reconciles us to God. If you're in the hearing of my voice and you feel like you're always searching and never finding, what you're actually looking for is the love of God revealed through Christ. It's the only place. Do you want a peace, a wholeness that has nothing to do with the circumstances of your life? This is where you find it. You find it in him. Jesus said, I bring this peace. And we also can have peace with other people. When people who before were enemies both find peace in Christ, suddenly, even as enemies, suddenly what happens is what they share in common is so much greater than what divides them. I'll never forget Boyce, James Montgomery Boyce, told a story that I read years ago, and he was talking about an American soldier in World War II in the Pacific Theater who had been captured by a Japanese soldier. They had really long bayonets, the Japanese did. And he, like, whatever he said, down, and he started marching this American soldier off to a POW camp. And can you imagine, if you're that American soldier, just the things that are racing through your mind about what life looks like now? He was a Christian, so he didn't know what else to do, so he just started singing. He started singing a hymn to comfort his heart. I don't know what it was, but he's singing. And as he's singing to God with a bayonet in his back, all of a sudden, as he's singing, he hears in English another voice actually singing the same song that he's singing. And it's not from behind him. He looks, and the Japanese soldier is singing in English next to him with his weapon put down. And he stopped, and in English, his enemy said, when I was young, missionaries were in Japan, and my parents and I have become followers of Christ. We're Christians. We are Christians. And so they shared a moment together, and then one brother let the other brother go. Because if Jesus really is the treasure of your life, and really is the treasure of someone else's life, even someone with whom you have struggles, is not what you share in common greater than what divides you? And so we read of how God intends to bring this to the earth in Isaiah chapter 2. I'm in Isaiah a lot. He will judge between the nations, will settle from many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Who looks forward to the day when no human trains for war? Well, the only hope for peace in our world is Jesus Christ revealed through his people. All other peace efforts will fail. It's actually funny. I ran across, I took it out because I didn't have time to share it, but now I'm telling you I'm going to stick it back in. It was like the American Peace Society, 10 steps to peace in America. And the first step was, how did it go? It was something like, get rid of all of the people who aren't open to everyone else's ideas. I'm done. I'm not going to say anything more. We're hopeless to find peace when we don't have peace ourselves. How do we become one? How do we become a carrier of this peace? I appreciate Don Carson, who made this statement. This beatitude does not hold a blessing to the peaceful, nor to those who yearn for peace. Boy, who complain for a lack of peace. And so this beatitude is only for those who actually bring it, who are peacemakers. To be a peacemaker, of course, you have to have peace with God. And so again, I'll just say, maybe that's your need today, to say, sorry, thank you, please, to say, Lord, I know I need you. I don't have you. I want you. I confess I'm sorry for never having trusted you, for never thanking you for the work you've done in my life, for all of the things I've said and done and wanted and thought that I'm just ashamed of. Please, forgive me. Thank you that you sent your son to die on the cross in my place. Thank you that he paid a debt I couldn't pay. Thank you that I can actually be forgiven. Jesus, thank you for coming. Please come into my life. I give you my life. Here it is, all of it, all of it. I am your follower. That's who I am. I place my faith in you. And if you've never genuinely communicated that to the Lord, do it right now. And he shows up and begins to bring change. He brings peace. So you have to have this peace to give it to others. But for those who haven't, how are we peacemakers? Well, you are a peacemaker when, first of all, you help the people around you find peace in your love. You're a peacemaker when you're on the lookout for hurting people and you draw close to them and love them. So last Tuesday to Thursday, our staff had a retreat this last week. And we met for breakfast, and then I send them off for like 4 hours to work through a passage and answer a bunch of questions. Included are some team questions. I've never told you all this. Included are some team questions like, is there anything you're afraid I'm going to do to you? Anything else you want to talk about? No limits, everything, nothing off limits. So, I mean, there's a lot for us to work through. So we had an Airbnb up in the north side of Kenosha. So I just went to the park that's up in Kenosha. And there's a lake, and it was a beautiful day, and I'm looking out, and I'm just sitting with the Lord and working on these things. And I look over, and there's a pier that's there across a little causeway. And on my side of the pier, there's this great big cement block. And at one point I look up, and there are lots of lunchtime, lunch break people who were walking and eating food and so forth. But there was one guy that was hunched over this cement block, and you just look at him, and you're like, you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I remember just seeing that going, wow, he looks like he's not in a good place. But he's there, I'm here, so I got back to my stuff, and a minute later, I saw him get up, and he walked by close enough, and he walked like he was carrying the weight of the world, that I just blurted out the obvious question, which was, are you okay? And it kind of arrested him. And he just blurted, and you'd be amazed at how many times strangers who are carrying a weight will answer that question if we just ask. And he said, the last time I was here, I almost jumped off that pier to end my life. Well, I got up at that point and went over and introduced myself. Hi, I'm Dan. Hi, I'm Don. Tell me what's happening. And he said, well, my life was such a mess. I ended up in jail for several years. When I got out, I left this place because it was not good, but everything I tried to do when I was away was just nothing worked. So I've come back. I don't have a job. He wasn't asking for money. He was just telling me, and I'm trying to see my son who will have nothing to do with me, and I don't know what to do. Now, I wish I could tell you I had a conversation with him that changed everything, but he left our time with his world still upended. But I just said, I hope I'm not being presumptuous, but can I just tell you, there is a God who is real, and he loves you. And he responded, he dismissed that, said, I go to church. So I'm like, okay, we're not having that conversation. I just said, can I just pray for you? And he startled and looked up and said, yeah. And I put my hand on Don's shoulder and prayed the sorts of things that came to mind for God to show himself to him, et cetera, and for reconciliation with the son. And he promised to meet his needs, but the greatest thing was to connect. So I prayed with him. And then it was like, he went to leave, and I just said, it was an honor to meet you. Thank you, and I'll be praying for you as I think about you. And as he walked away, he stopped and turned back, and there actually were tears in his eyes, and he shook my hand hard, which is a really good thing. He shook my hand hard, and he said, thank you, and walked away. Now, his life still is full of pain. And I've been trying to pray for Don, and as you think of him, just pray that God would show himself to him. But I do think the Lord brought a modicum of his peace to this hurting man through that encounter. You're a peacemaker when you see pain. And right, it's been getting said more and more, who's hurting around you? Everyone. Everyone is fighting a hard battle. But sometimes it rises to the surface and people are feeling it. And when you see it, all you do is draw close to them and say, are you okay? Enter into what it is that they're experiencing. Feel it with them. If you can bring healing or solution, that's fantastic. But just help them not be alone. It is the easiest thing to enter into other people's pain. And when you do, Here, there's the miracle in this is that somehow the peace of Jesus Christ is conveyed and experienced. We're peacemakers when in our lives we bring peace through our love. That's one way. Second of all, obviously, we are peacemakers when we bring to people the message of Jesus Christ, the ultimate peace that can be brought. When whoever it was that invited Chris to that hay ride thing brought him peace. Or again, last week in our baptistry, this is Annette, and Annette's the one who shared can we go to the next slide? Annette's the one, that's Sue behind her, Amore, her sister, who actually also became a Christian at Lakeland years ago and then has moved away. But Sue kept inviting Annette to church, and she's like, no. All right, just to get you off my back, I'll go. And in this room, she discovered that God was much more, the Lord, it's like, I had no idea what this would be. So last week, we got to hear the story of the peace that the Lord brought to Annette through Sue. For many people, it's like, I don't know how to sit down and draw out the gospel. That just feels daunting to me. But what you can do is tell people you encounter how Jesus has changed your life. Tell your story. Can I just tell you how Jesus has changed my life? People meet him when we tell our story. You can say, I don't exactly know what to say, but I want you to find something I found. Can I invite you to church or to a meal that I bring other Christians to? But we are peacemakers when we are carriers of the message of Jesus. Third, we are peacemakers when we bring peace into relationships. There are ways of relating that increase disunity. There are ways of relating that increase peace. Which one are you? In individual interactions and in group interactions, like how do you respond when someone harms you? Mercy brings peace. So listen to Parker's message from 2 weeks ago, and it's a full-on treatment of what it means to share mercy with someone, how we do that as Christians. But we also bring peace, and I'm going to just stick with speech for a minute. We also bring peace when we avoid that which destroys peace. We speak peace when we avoid grumbling and complaining and insults and sarcasm. All of those destroy peace in the people with whom we're speaking. But we bring peace when we do the opposite. Grumbling and complaining destroys the peace of those with whom we speak because I may be feeling bad about something, but the more I grumble about it, the worse what I'm experiencing feels to me and those to whom I speak. Insults and sarcasm harm what they may show as a streak of cruelty that's in our hearts. That may well be what's on display. He wants what comes out of our lips to be the opposite. So instead of grumbling, what would it look like if you practiced the discipline of thankfulness? All day, every day. There was a Trappist monk who was only allowed to say 2 words every 3 years. After the first 3 years, he met with Brother Superior and said, "Bad bed." 3 years later, he came back and said, "Bad food." 3 years later, he came back and said, "No TV." 3 years after that, he came holding his rabs and sandals in his hand and he said, "I quit." To which Father Superior said, "No wonder, you've done nothing but complain since you've been here." I don't know why that strikes me as funny. I did actually run across an article this last week that talked about the complaint culture that exists in our nation these days. There is a culture of complaining. And can I just tell you, this is a place that we want to be different. That we're not grumblers. And so instead of grumbling, be thankful. When it comes to complaining, instead of complaining, to labor to work on being content. Do Christians have reasons for contentment every day? Yeah. Yes, we're sons and daughters of the Almighty. He has positioned us to bring glory to him through good and through pain. And I'm not saying there's no pain, and I'm not saying we're Teflon and we live above it all. Far from it. But there is nothing this world can take from you that matters if he is your treasure. That's why That's why Justin Martyr could say just before he was executed by the emperor of Rome, you can kill us, but you can't hurt us. Are we dialed into that? We bring peace when we speak out of a heart that is thankful, a heart that is contented instead of insults. Can we practice the practice of honor? That we look for that in the people around us and name it and honor it and call it out. Can that be something? Somebody's phone is going off. Somebody is mortified right about now. Can we? I can't believe that phone is, no, I'm just kidding. Just showing you what not to do, okay? Can we practice contentment? Paul says, to Christians who know Christ, if we have food and clothing, it'll be enough. Do you know Christ well enough that if all you had was food and clothing, you'd be contented? He is genuinely that good. Instead of tearing others down with sarcasm, what would it look like if you actually sought to protect everyone with whom you engage? Those are means by which we're peacemakers. Now, there's so much more I could say. But here's the good news of this text. Blessed are the peacemakers, the ones who have Christ's peace and who seek to convey it. When you're around people who are grumbling and complaining and sharing insults and sarcasm, just don't say anything. Just don't enter in. It's amazing how impactful that is. What is the benefit of this? How is there benefit? What does bringing peace do? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God, this text says. So what's it mean that we're called sons of God? Well, it means we look like him. When we're bringing peace, that looks like him. That's what this text promises. So can I just ask, do you see this man? Anyone know whose son this is? Nobody? That's Scott Eastwood, the son of Clint. That's who that is. Does anybody know whose son this is? Milo Gibson, the son of Mel Gibson. They actually look a lot alike when you look at them. Anyone know whose son this is? It's Hopper Penn, the son of Sean Penn. Does anyone know whose son this is? This is actually, next picture, this is actually 4 generations. That's my dad, actually. And Jonathan and Noah. To be the son of means you resemble. So do you realize when you're bringing peace to someone, you resemble the Lord. And not only do you resemble the Lord, but when he says we resemble him, what he's saying is he is breaking into the physical world and making himself seeable. He is seeable. He is seeable through your bringing peace. What greater thing could be said at your funeral than, that person helped me to see and know God better? If you're a peacemaker, that's what it is that he does. This is the promise. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to continue in worship here in a moment. But first, I'm going to ask us to consider, Lord, what would it look like for me to genuinely be a peacemaker as the primary thing people experience in me? Can we just close our eyes for a second? Is this text the Lord's word to any of us? To you. He loves it when we repent and confess. That's faith. If there are places that you haven't brought peace to others, either destroyed peace in others or not even thought about it, right now, would you confess it to him and just say, Father, please forgive me. Forgive me for this. Forgive me that I would have upset the peace of others. I wasn't even thinking about it. Thank him that he would use you to bring his peace to others. And ask him to make you into a peacemaker.